talk about your garden makeovers. Thanks, Randy, for sharing that one with us. Absolutely terrific job. Right now we're going to be talking about something that may be a new concept to some of you, but for us veteran gardeners here in Austin, it's something we're used to thinking about. That's the joys and perils of zone pushing. I'm joined by Bill Scheick. Bill, you're a retired professor of English, but a really passionate gardener. How did you get interested in gardening? I got to ask that question before we get underway.
It's a bit of a mystery to me too, but I do remember when I was a child, we would spend part of the summer at a shore in New Jersey, and as a child who grew up in Newark, New Jersey, I did not have
not exactly the most verdant place on earth.
Not really, and I was amazed by the amount of flora that existed on that coast. And I actually one time transplanted some wild tiger lilies onto a property, and I think maybe from that time on I was fascinated by having some interaction with growing things.
You may have pushed a zone there too. No, we're talking about this concept of zone pushing. This is something that, for a lot of people out there, they think, what does that mean? We're talking about plant zones here, right?
And we're specifically talking about cold hardiness zones, because there are also heat zones, which many people don't know about. But cold hardiness zones have to do with the limits of what a plant can take by way of freezing temperatures or cold. What zone are we? Officially, according to the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, we are Zone 8 in Central Texas. But if you look around and you see what people are growing, you'll notice that in the ground, you'll notice that they are growing Zone 9 plants routinely, and even Zone 10 plants. And
this is something that anybody who has gardened for a while in Austin really notices, is that there are a lot of plants that we can, quote, get away with now that we couldn't back in, say, like the 1980s.
And there's a joy in being able to expand the repertoire of your garden by including plants that you might associate more with San Antonio or farther south. The risk, of course, can be if you're not careful, or if the plants aren't established. And I think that's the key word: established. Established Zone 9 plants do very well here, but the risk can be those 3 days in the 18 degrees that we had last winter. There are ways of minimizing that risk. One is to position your plant for microclimates that are advantageous for them, south sides of structures. Along foundations which retain heat even in winter from the sun. Adequate mulching, pine bark would be best. And something that people don't think about much, but throwing a bucket of water on the roots, at least not less than 24 hours before a freeze, but between 48 and 24 hours.
And I think that is something that a lot of people forget, is that a plant that is adequately, has enough moisture, is much more able to sustain a heavy frost damage than one that's dry. And for some people that seems counterintuitive. They think that putting water out in advance of a cold front could imperil the plant in some way. But just the opposite seems to be the case.
I noticed, too, that when we have frost or freezing, if you look at your property, because we have such a light frost or snowfall level, you'll notice there are places where there's no accumulation. That's a microzone, a climate zone, rather, to be exploited for pushing the zone of a plant. Often over plumbing, over water lines. You'll notice there's no frost over that.
Well, underneath of trees, up against buildings, all these little different things that offer advantages. There could be different zones in your own yard, effectively, if you really are attuned to that. And a lot of gardeners, over time, become that attuned to their garden. They know where these different spots are: the moister spots, the drier spots, the hotter and colder spots. So, this is a fascinating topic. Now, how can people know where we are now. This is one thing that is a little confusing because there are competing maps out there.
There are. The USDA map is over 20 years old, and apparently, I mean, from our anecdotal experience, not satisfactory. The National Arbor Day Foundation on their website has a more updated cold hardiness zone map, and it was released in 2006, I believe. And that map shows Central Austin to be Zone 9, in fact, which means if we're planting Zone 9 plants, we might not really be pushing.
Right.
Which is why some people actually have gone to Zone 10 plants here. I've seen
always pushing the edge.
it's a gamble,
right?
Where the house of nature holds the odds, but you can hedge those odds by being very sensitive about where you and how you take care of your plants.
Well, I want to give people an idea about some of the different plants, because you talk about the joys of this, and there are a lot of plants out there that really do bring joy to gardeners. And there's some of these that that you've had success with, or you've at least experimented with.
Right.
There's an Echinopsis species here that called Big Bertha, and this is one that, again, I would look at this plant and I would say, no way would I grow this in the ground.
No, and I don't blame you. Actually, when I had a writing assignment from the Austin paper, it's one of those great writing assignments. Go to 5 nurseries, find the hottest plant at each nursery, and feature it. And I found Big Bertha at the Natural Gardener. But I had to weigh what to recommend to someone who would buy this pricey plant with pie-sized flowers on it. And I did write and say, I think you better put it in a container. Well, I heard from a reader saying, I'm growing them in the ground. This is a Zone 10 plant.
Right.
This particularly a hybrid, and it might be because it's a hybrid, it's doing better in the ground here. It's still going to be risky to some extent.
Right.
I had very good success with a plant from China. It's a Zone 9 plant called pink jasmine, Jasminum polyanthum. For years and years I've had it, and with very little care, it ran its vine around things. But this last winter, I mean, even after all those years of success, it's clearly been set back. I have about 7 of those plants. They've all been set back. Now, I wasn't neglectful with them. And maybe if I had been more attentive, I got the trust after a while that they were going to run.
That
go for
false
it.
trust.
I know.
Which is one of the perils.
They're not dead, but it's going to take time for them to come back.
Right, right. And so often the recovery time is slow. Now, a lot of people are growing plumerias in the ground here. This is just, when I started in the nursery trade, this would have been unthinkable.
It is still almost unthinkable. But I've noticed that people who are doing that have them definitely located in strategic places where north wind and exposure, excess exposure won't overtest them. Still, in the long run, I'm not sure how that experiment will turn out.
Really? Well, we'll see. There are a lot of different kufias as well, and this is a plant that has become very popular. The bat-faced kufia, for example, is one that I see lots of people planting in the ground now.
Actually, and it's treated as a xeriscape plant. One benefit of all the kufias is that they have small taproots, which means they do need water to keep flowering, but they don't need much water to keep flowering. The downside is that they are small, and if you don't mulch them, you do run a risk of losing them. They're Zone 9 plants, all of them, including Mexican heather, which is a very beautiful, compact, marginal plant, to the cigar or firecracker kufia, which is somewhat larger but easily managed, to the bat-faced, which can get quite wide, can get 3-4 feet wide. Right. Which is also a beautiful plant.
An incredible flower. Now, we only have just a few seconds left here, Bill, but I want to let people know that they can follow you in a lot of different sources. You write for the Austin American-Statesman.
Have written for them.
And also Texas Gardener magazine.
I'm a contributing editor there.
Right. So they can find your articles there and share some of those perils and joys with you as you continue your explorations in the garden like so many of the rest of us are. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and coming up next is Daphne Richards.